Join us for the Criterion Institute podcast as Joy Anderson, a global thought leader in business and social change, leads us through a series of discussions, interviews, frameworks, rants, and reframes that will help you better understand how to use finance as a tool for transformative systems change.
I am Joy Anderson, and this is the Criterion Institute podcast. Today, I'm speaking with Vanessa Roanhorse. Vanessa's remarkable, creative mind, force of nature, just a powerhouse of connections and insight that has been rocking the boat in impact investing for quite a few years now. I had the pleasure of meeting her in New Mexico in 2019, and since then have been learning from her and with her. Today, in our conversation, which feels like a continuation of so many other conversations, we discuss the importance of creating safe containers and building right relationships, friendships, and trust when navigating the complexities of the financial sector and creating transformative systems change. At some level, the core of how we think about power dynamics is not about money, but about the relationships that drive money. Internalizing the pressures of capitalism, patriarchy, white supremacy has over time and can every day impact mental and physical health. And it's important to recognize that these are systemic issues, not personal failures. And therefore, when those experiences intersect with the systems of finance, where the experience of folks who have been systematically disenfranchised, the encounter with systems can be challenging, and that interaction cannot be underestimated. So we explore strategies for healing. So from the neuroscience of trauma to the power of friendships and trust and how to build those inside of financial transactions. This conversation promises to challenge conventional wisdom and inspire new ways of thinking about finance. Enjoy. Vanessa, could you start by defining for me maybe multiple definitions? I'm not tied to any one. There's a lot of conversation about sort of trauma-informed approaches to all kinds of things, and then trauma-informed approaches to investing. What are some ways that, I don't know, what does that mean? And it probably means a dozen different things.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the trauma-informed piece for us, we've had to actually, interestingly, come up with a definition, because the more we learn about the impacts of trauma and the science of trauma, it's really important to acknowledge like how we're employing these concepts. So at RCLC, we really decided to define trauma-informed as an approach that's rooted in education, particularly on the neuroscience of trauma. So that includes collective, racialized, and personal trauma within a colonial impact in context. So like we have to name the colonial piece as Indigenous people, because our trauma starts, our collective Indigenous trauma happened with the colonization of our peoples, but also acknowledging that like in the last 100 years, the work around understanding how important your brain health is and how your brain and your gut health are interconnected. And then just the unfortunate scientific process in which they have now confirmed you can have in your cellular DNA trauma that's passed along over and over and over. And then additionally, aside along that, there is tons of research on the impacts to particularly Black and brown women called just weathering of survival. So I give all of that context because the way we think a lot about trauma informed is that we have to be very specific to where we believe the trauma for Indigenous women starts. And then we have to acknowledge all of the parts within it is also very connected to science and the neuroscience of our bodies. And I think like when we say those things, it also means the way we speak, the way language can be weaponized, the way we approach listening and unlearning past things that have been harmful and holding the space for people to unlearn in a messy way requires a lot of thoughtfulness. And I'm not going to say structure, but safe container building to support psychological safety along the way. I provide all of this because people say trauma informed all the time. But when you look at what they're doing, it's not this. It's a handful of surveys and maybe some one-on-ones. And I don't mean everybody, but I will say the term itself is being co-opted to sound like we're building things differently when really we're providing the same thing. We're just tacking on maybe an additional X, Y, and Z. And I think that's a clear example in our service deliveries. But when we talk about it in finance, it's very concerning because the trauma of money, which, by the way, is a full educational system that anyone can participate in. But if we talk about the trauma of money, or we look at Edgar Villanueva's book on decolonizing wealth, the deep impacts that capital and finance has played on Indigenous people and everybody really, but from my lens, Indigenous, it'll be generational healing before I say we can imagine a true different way to deal in employee finance.
It's then not just inside of us, but it's inside of the structures and systems that perpetuate the same thing, or symbols and mannerisms and behaviors that trigger it.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's there's the structural stuff, and then there's just the batshit annoying stuff where it is thoughtless, right? Of the dismissal that you would have any problem just understanding what I'm talking about when I'm saying these numbers. They're very clear. I don't understand why these numbers are hard for you.
Yeah.
And not being aware that the number of times you're repeating that is having a physical effect on the person you're talking to, no matter how well they're hiding it.
Right.
I do think, and I'm wondering if you know of anybody who's been working on this, because one of the challenges, I mean, there's systemic shifts that can make that the system's not so effed up. There's also, I worry sometimes when we psychologize things, because then they often get put in a place that's devalued and nobody's responsible for any. Like, oddly, when you name it as a psychological thing, it's one of the easiest ways to have your issue go to the basement in a dark room with one guy who will see 3 people a month, kind of stuff. It turns into a different stigma. But so I wonder, at some point, don't we just need to equip the survivors with tools to navigate? I don't want to say it's their responsibility, but at some point, the weathering requires weatherproofing.
I mean, the answer is absolutely. Like, I think what we spend a lot of time trying to do is like, how can we, through our processes, help you unlearn how money has worked and not worked for you, help you and not help them identify. Because the other thing is like, this is an individual journey. Like everyone has to be on their own healing journey. And part of it is like what we're interested around trauma informed is to say, we want to bring the tools like trauma of money. We want to bring the tools of like Indigenous rematriation as a process and a way to center Indigenous women together, to share stories, create safety, provide a network. But at the end of the day, like the weatherproofing has to start with you, because the systems are not changing anytime soon. And also, when we're not working on our healing and we're not working through the things that have hurt us, most recently to generations ago, things happen like lateral violence. We hurt the whole thing about, hurt people. We have the potential to like stop that, at least in our own circles. And this has been like a really big learning journey for me because it took me a long time to realize that like to do this work requires not just me, but the people I'm doing it with to be working on their own healing. Because I can't carry that healing for anybody. It's all of the memes out there. You got to fill your cup first, put on your life jacket first, the thing is we hear those, but what it really looks like is it's messy and it takes time and it's years of work and like you gotta like just do it and it's ugly. And so anyhow, I just bring that up because to your point on like weatherproofing, the answer is absolutely we can, but people have to want to step into it.
No, I think that's one of the phrases that I learned from Teresa Younger is to think about how people are, and we've decided this a while ago that we need to work with people who are responsible for their own hope.
That's right.
And that for me is one of the, I think it's similar to what you were saying of just they're, but it's I think it is what you were just saying, right? It's that somebody is saying I am responsible for believing that there was a way through and that I will find that and that's my job to do.
Right.
But in the meantime, I think we can build people better blanket forts, which is my go-to place of recovery and finding those places where you do just need to retreat into a couch with something over your head and some escape mechanism that just for a bit slows it all down. Whatever people, and then get your umbrella and go back out again.
It's true though. And I don't know what that looks like for you. For me, it has been my circle of friends in the work. So folks like you, my sister and forever co-conspirator, Jamie Gloche, my team, like it's, that's who I can like take the armor off. I remember the first time I went to SOCAP and the first time I got to meet you, Joy, at breakfast. But that morning, I remember singing a song, and it's a song about putting your armor back on. And you do that in certain Navajo ceremonies as a way to like unarmor yourself so you can be fully present to the holy people. But before the sun rises, you have to put the armor back on because that's how you protect your holiness, your beautiful self. And I remember having to think that and do that at SOCAP the first time because I just didn't know what to expect. And since then, that's been like a metaphor for me as I think about moving into those spaces, because when I'm in circle with folks like you and other people, I can take that armor off and I can like relax and be honest and real. So like, I feel like people, going back to our other conversation, relationships and friendships have been the greatest like caretaker for me in this work.
And I'll just reinforce that. I think that's exactly right. And I don't think that we think enough about friendships. And I had a mentor once who told me that you should never do business with friends. In the 40 years since then, I've come to the fundamental conclusion that you should never do business with anybody who's not a friend.
100%. It is the most intimate relationship.
Yep. And that's, in some ways, that names the intimacy of money.
Yep.
And says that we need to be in friendship to have financial transactions because, in fact, of the trauma. And to only be in financial relationships where you are in a friendship would be the building. That would be, I don't know, I'm not thrilled with this trauma informed, but that would be building our way out of trauma, right? That would be together building a different way, and that the pathway through would be have less trauma because we are with each other. We are with friends doing this. And I know in many ways impact investing and gender lens investing has tried to do that, but not very intentionally. And some of the mainstream power hegemony ways of doing things slip in with a vengeance. And so they're rarely the places, I don't feel safe at SoCap. I mean, I know I'm safe because I have a lot of power, but I wouldn't feel safe if I didn't have that power.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is right. And I really like the twist that you're saying around if we actually centered friendships as part of our building, dreaming, and designing things, particularly in the financial sector, like just fundamentally how that itself would change the conversations, change the outcomes, and change our own personal experience of working in this space. Because I'm completely with you. Because as you were talking, the first thought I had is like, part of maybe why this isn't happening or folks don't want to have this conversation is relationship and friendship takes time. And these things are not what I would call quickly scalable. And the industry is about scale. And so how can we, like, again, going back to this like complexity where all of these things are true and they can exist, is like to do that kind of future building means that we actually have to do less to do more, it seems like.
Okay, my brain's exploding because, and I want to reframe this just a little bit because everything you're saying is gorgeous. And I'm going to call bunk on the it's slower. Here's why. What we try to do is take community, relationships, places where people have economies that are connected. And if we simply took those naturally occurring economies and financed them, it would be the most simple, the most efficient thing. And I think this is what you described when you described to me that group of women entrepreneurs that came together in your first event at Native Women Lead. I'll never forget the way you described it. It was just like thousands of women. I don't know. In my head, it was millions of Native women coming together, and what they could have just built in that economy is about the efficiencies of friendship. What happens instead is they come together, they gird their armor, they write business plans, and then armor fully intact, they go find a bank to see if that bank has a chink in their armor, which will let them possibly slip in. But it's a fight. And what if we took the money in the bank? I mean, this is where we're just sitting in this conversation with how do we find the places where there is already connection, there is already movement, fluidity, activity, and finance that And then we'll have the efficiencies of friendship.
I think you're right. Like, I think the reframe on that is totally right, because one of the tenets we have here is that, like, we start slow to build relationship, to not move fast because that's the purpose. But by the time you click and you know what you're doing, everything is just like easy, right? Like, decisions can happen. Hard conversations are easily managed, and you're working through, and people are all vision focused forward together. So I think you're absolutely right. I was coming from more of a place of like, how do people who don't actually work this way have to figure it out? And they just don't have the buy-in. Like, for them, it just seems too cumbersome. But
yeah, no, I feel you on that. But again, how do we frame the efficiency of trust? Because they've benefited from the that's no different than what white privileged men have been doing for centuries, which is it's easier when you're in a friendship and things flow more easily. It's just when you're trying to shift and introduce in no people and disrupt those systems that people get pissed. And all of a sudden, we're the annoying ones and we're pushed back out, which reinforces the trauma of those who came with it. And but how do we I mean, I'm not a big separatist usually about like let's go build our own system. I think we need to work in the big systems and build new systems, but I do think we need to learn how to honor the power, the richness, the safety, and the speed of trust.
yeah, I believe in that. I do believe in the power of trust, and I do believe in the power of like the right kind of relationship, right? Because you can have a lot of kinds of relationship. And friendship is a really great example of that. I'm not sure, because to build that trust in a system that fundamentally is grounded in sort of a non-values aligned purpose, it's really difficult to create. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think a lot about this idea, like my job isn't to heal the system. Like, I'm not here to heal it, but we're actually asking us to heal it, because we're having to heal people who don't realize that they're part of like they are participating in toxic environments and relationships, because this is how it's always been. And then the other part of it is there are actors out there who don't want us to have anything, who absolutely are working towards undermining this work. And so there's some of this idea of like building trust. It's like, I want to do that, but not at the expense of like myself, not at the expense of people who are doing the coolest and baddest work on the ground. I don't want to like false promise anything to any of those people, but at the same time, it's like, how do we collectively trust fall into those we know we can trust? Because maybe we can help co-create this. But again, there's a bit of like, to do that and to do it in the bigger system, there's a sacrificial piece to this. Whether you want to call it death doulaing, but someone has to do that. And I know for me, that is not my job today. So I don't know if I'm taking us on the wrong tangent here, but it's just like, I'm with you and I want that, but I'm also like at the expense of who?
Right. Which I think comes full circle back, perhaps, to this question of what does it mean to be trauma-informed investing? And some part of that is about honoring right relationship, but some part of it is recognizing that that is a very complex piece of jargon that needs to be unpacked significantly and cannot be a tick box anywhere that says, check, trauma informed. And so all the things that you just named about the perils, about when you can do trust falls and who are the death doulas and who's taking down the system and who's just trying to do their best to survive in it. And all of those are pathways where people are informed by their own trauma, but hopefully also by their own healing.
Sound baths for everyone. That's my new favorite thing.
So what just struck me, Vanessa, as we've been talking, is that we often talk about diversity, barriers to inclusion, why Indigenous women aren't at the table as kind of why women are at the table, why Black women are not at the table, ranges of exclusion as kind of I always hear a meta narrative about, well, men don't want to give up their power. And if there's somehow a pie problem, that if we showed up, then somehow they would lose, and it's a pie. I don't know if it's a blueberry pie or a pumpkin pie, but it's always a pie, right? That like some zero sum game. And I was just thinking as you were talking, I don't think it's a zero sum game. I just think it's annoyance. People like to feel comfortable, and they don't like things to be challenging. And they know that things are going to be challenging from time to time. But if they see somebody coming who they think is going to challenge them, that is going to make their job less easy. And to be frank, they just want that person to shut up.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like a lot of times in the work that I talk a lot about, which is getting more Indigenous women into positions of decision making, leadership, and power over resources, whatever the resource is. We're doing all of this work. We're building confidence. We're trying to like help folks find a way to navigate this system. But at the very end of it, it's people just don't want us there. Like we are not wanted in those rooms. We're not wanted. It's only okay. It's that whole thing. It's like, you want to hire us for a DEI hire. We'll use our faces on like the brochure. But the moment we stop agreeing with you, the moment we get past the honeymoon onboarding phase, the moment we speak any truth or any lived experience, HR processes are used to like are weaponized, and or access to the conversations in the right circles were denied. And so we don't have any control over that. And it doesn't matter what we're doing, but it's because we're not really wanted. If we were wanted, we would be there.
I never know. It's been a long time since I've worked in a big structure. So most of my experience is in pretty small teams. And so I think there are different solutions when I don't even know what the solutions are to feel wanted in a big corporate structure. I think nobody feels wanted in a big corporate structure. But I do know that small teams, small organizations, no, what I was just thinking is that we need to stop making the business case, and we just actually need to build more friendships.
I would be in agreement with that. I mean, in a lot of ways, like the bodies of work that we're most excited about is when we are working with folks we define as right relationship. Some of the most important criteria for us to hire or to be in partnership is like, how do we define right relationship? Like, how long does that take? The other is like, how do we center your lived experience and the gifts that came out of it as just as valid and valuable to the other things you learn in the institutional educational system or your certifications? Because at the end of the day, if you have a real relationship, you can actually navigate the complexities.
Yeah. And just as one final thought here, a lot of where I internalize stuff is in my belly.
Yep. Remember our
And
belly rub
so,
we did?
yeah, that was just thinking about that. One of those great moments of martyrdom had an audience when our bellies rubbed at SoCap. And that could be a song. Our our martyrdom had an audience when our bellies rubbed at SoCap.
That moment unlocked like a real vulnerability I was going through at the time when I saw you. And I remember just crying when I was hugging you because the belly and the connection, but also to your point where I hold my stress and I hold my trauma, where I hold my pressures is totally there. So I'll never forget how you made me feel. I'm still grateful to this day for that hug.
Yeah, well, our bellies remain connected, my friend.
To learn more about our work, visit us at criterioninstitute.org. And if you're enjoying this podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your reviews help our podcast reach a wider audience. Thanks for listening.